Module 3, Lesson 13 homework. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to look right here. We have a half, and over here we have 4/9. That's less than a half because half of 9 would be 4.5, and this number is less than that. So if I add up a half and something that's less than a half, I'm going to get less than a half. Sorry, less than a whole. Over here we have 5/8. Half of 8 is 4, so this one is 5, so it's greater than a half. Half of 5 is 2.5, so this is greater than a half. So when you have greater than a half and greater than a half, you're going to end up with greater than 1. When I look at this one, I'm going to ignore the 1 right now. I have 1/5, and 1/5 is smaller than 1/3. So this number is larger. So to subtract it, I would need to borrow from 1 and get a 0. Now that I'm going to 0, I know that I'm going to be less than 1. Over here, I have 4 minus 3, which is 1. I have 3/5 and 3/4. And 3/4 is greater than 3/5, so I would have to borrow, which would make that down to a 0 then, and I would be less than 1. Now over here, when we're talking about greater than a half or less than a half, we're going to work with this. We're going to look through these, and we're going to start with this one down here. Well, down here, half of 7 is 3.5. So this is greater than a half already. And if I have a half and I'm adding something that's greater than a half, no matter what, I'm going to end up with something greater than a half. So now we'll go back up here. We have 1/5 plus 1/4. These are two numbers that are smaller than a half. Some of you might not be sure if we can add it together, what it would get. So we're just going to add them up here. And we end up with 9/20. Half of 20 would be 10, so this is less than a half. So now we're going to look at letter F. And we have 6/7 minus 1/6. And we're subtracting these two. And we end up with 29/42. And half of 42 would have been 21, so this is greater than a half. And the next one was 1 1/7 minus 5/6. And when we do this, we end up with this. And we have to borrow. So when we borrow, this becomes a 0, this becomes 48. And 48 minus 35 is 13/42. So then we ask ourselves, what's half of 42, which would be 21, so that's less than a half. Next, we are comparing these. In order to compare them, we're going to look right here. So we have the 8 3/4 over here. This is 5 plus 2 is 7. So we know that this is greater than a half and this is greater than a half, so we are going to bump up to 8. The question is, are we going to bump up high enough that we'll get more than 8 3/4? So we can check and do 4/5 and 2/3 and add them together. And we end up with 22/15. And when we do that, we end up with 1 7/15. So if I add that to this, 7 plus 1 7/15, I end up with 8 7/15. But now I need to compare 8 7/15 to 8 3/4. Well, this is bigger than a half. This is smaller than a half, so this has to be larger. So now over here, I have 3 minus 2, which is 1, and I have a 1. 4/7 minus 3/5. 4/7 plus 3/5. The addition side will be bigger because they are the same fractions. So now I have 4.5 plus 1 4/9, and I'm adding that to 5 13/18. So I'm going to start by doing 4.5 and 1 4/9, and I'm going to change these. And I end up with 5 17/18. And this is 5 13/18, so I know that this is larger. Next, we have 10 3/8 minus 7 3/5, and 3 3/8 plus 3 3/5. So 10 minus 7 is 3. This is subtraction of the same fractions that I'm now adding. So when I add, that side is bigger. And to find out if this is true, we're going to do 5 minus 3, which is 2. This only has 1. Over here, I'm subtracting these two numbers. And over here, I'm adding these two numbers. So we have to actually see because this gives us 2. So we're going to do 5 2/3 and 3 3/4. And we're going to end up with, we have 5 8/12 and 3 9/12. And when we add them, we get 8 17/12, which is 9 5/12. Oh, except I added when I should have subtracted. So this should be 2, and this should be not be able to be done. So we need to start this part over. So I can't do 8 minus 9. I do need to pay attention to that. I need to borrow 1, which makes that 4. Once that makes that 4, I'm going to add this to over here, and we end up with 4 20/12 minus 3 9/12. And when we do that, we end up with an answer of 1 11/12. So we go over here and we add 2/3 and 3/4. 2/3 is 8/12 and 3/4 is 9/12. And we add them together, we get 17/12. And we have to add this 1 plus the 1 5/12. So we're already at 2. So they're not even. The answer is no, they are not even. Next, we have a tree limb that hangs 5 1/4 feet from a telephone wire. The city trims back the branch before it grows within 2.5 feet of the wire. Will the city allow the tree to grow 2 3/4 more feet? So it's this far from a telephone wire. They cut the branch this far. So we have to cut the branch. And if we cut the branch so that it's only 2.5 feet, we can turn this and leave it like this. We have to borrow. And we end up with 2 3/4. And it says, will the city allow the tree to grow 2 3/4 more feet? Well, this is how much more room we have until it's this far away. So they will allow it. Mr. Kreider wants to paint 2 doors and several shutters. It takes 2 1 gallons paint for each door, and there's 2 doors. So that would get us to 4 2/8. And it takes 1 3/5 to paint his shutters. So we're going to add this all up. When we do this, we have to find a common denominator. And we end up with 5 34/40. So the question then says, if Mr. Kreider buys 3 2-gallons, which is really 6 gallons, does he have enough paint to do this? And the answer would be yes.